welcome guests to what we expect to be a thorough, thoughtful, and provocative conversation tonight. The subject, peace activism in an era of Trump, Putin, and NATO, has for many taken on increasingly ominous relevance and immediacy. As recently as a year and a half ago, issues relating to NATO, Vladimir Putin, and Donald Trump would not have been prominent in our consciousness nor seen as possible life and death matters. Yet now, as this president and his minions threaten to deconstruct our entire society, politically, constitutionally, economically, and scientifically, the era of Trump, Putin, and NATO, and the dangers that each may represent, are being experienced viscerally by so many of us. So tonight, our guests, Reiner Braun and Gerson, will address specific questions and offer possible direction for those who believe that peace activism today is more necessary than any time in recent history. So here are the questions we will pose to our speakers. What specific opportunities and challenges does the Trump administration pose for peace activists in this country? Are there lessons from the European peace movement that can help U.S. activists deal with the Trump agenda? How is the developing Trump foreign policy impacting the UN negotiations on a treaty to ban nuclear weapons?
So where to begin? I think I'll begin with Trump, and to say not included in the introduction was that after the Paris Peace Accords were signed, which we thought had ended the Vietnam War, I had the extraordinary privilege of being invited to work in Europe with the War Resisters International. This was in the mid-'70s. And that provided me the unique opportunity to work with a number of people really across Western Europe who had been involved in the nonviolent resistance to Nazi occupations. And one learns deeply in that circumstance. And as I've watched what's been happening, and also maybe drawing on my work in the civil rights movement, thinking about what kind of energy, what kind of resistance, what kind of spirit, what depth of analysis we need to bring to this moment. So, as I said in the introduction, I played this bridging role with movements. And with the negotiations going on at the United Nations now, you have people who have come from a number of countries to try to advance the ban or the prohibition treaty, try to move the process ahead toward the abolition of nuclear weapons. And so it was last Saturday, I met with a delegation from Japan. And my responsibility was to help them understand what happened with Trump, why we faced this, and what its implications were. So I thought maybe I would just sort of begin there and then move. So I tried to explain, what are the causes of Trump's rise. And on the one hand, we know that it has a role with there's a significant role of economic globalization, the hollowing out of the economy, neoliberalism, profit-taking, the economic inequality, and really the failure of the Democratic Party, of many liberals in this society, even of our unions, to stanch that bleeding of economic security and the pain that it causes. Deep, and I think we don't speak about this quite enough yet, deep is the racism that is still very dominant in this society, and related to the economic decline, especially for sectors of the white working class, is the loss of status, the perception of superiority, and the anger that could be exploited by Trump. That we have Sessions as our Attorney General, one of the most right-wing and racist senators from the Deep South. He tells us a lot about where we are and part of the society that we have to deal with. I think we also have to recognize that not unlike other countries, thinking here to the 30s as well, There are more than a few people in this country who have authoritarian personalities, for whom facts don't really matter, and who will respond to authoritarian calls. I mean, the fact that we have so many evangelicals voting for Trump, the total violation, ostensibly, of all their values, should tell us something about what we're up against. Then, of course, when Hillary Clinton was making $240,000 an hour for speaking, a little bit more than I'll get tonight, that I think undercut people's sense of trust and ability to support such a candidate. And then on top of that, of course, we had our FBI director's fist on the electoral scales, and I think we're still learning the degree to which Russians may have had some influence, so that's not clear. There are certainly enough other forces at play. So having said that, it's been interesting. We've been touring Reiner now for about a month, and we've been speaking together. It's interesting to get his perception, which he'll share with you. But let me ask just people raise hands here. How many people in this room participated in the Women's March on January 21st? Right, it's wonderful to see. And I was in Washington, where you basically couldn't move because there were so many people. My wife, my grandson were in Boston. They could barely move from the subway. But to say that this reflects really the powerful opposition that we have, and as Reiner will likely say, this has really inspired the rest of the world to understand that there is another America here, and that we can ultimately prevail. So as I see it, we're essentially three contending forces, and it's not going to be over in a week or a month. On the one hand, now we have I think what we can only describe as an illegitimate neo-fascist Trump regime. Its corruptions are incredibly deep. We have a family government now. I mean, Trump, his son-in-law, his daughter now ostensibly on the payroll. The corruptions. I've been reading about the Crimean War of late, and it's like the old oligarchies and monarchies of old we have there. But to add to that, of course, we have Bannon, who has said that his goal and that of Sessions, let me quote, is the birth of a new political order. So, the struggle that we're about is not just a day-to-day struggle over this issue or that issue. Their goal is to transform the political order in this country, and that's what we have to be resisting. Second, of course, is the national security establishment. And there's some alliances here with Trump. You're looking at another $54 billion for the military budget. The competing roles here with the CIA, the NSA, and the rest. It's an interesting dynamic that's at play. I think we don't identify with that force. And then thirdly, we have the democratic forces. And just to appreciate, over and above what we have had with the women's marches, the people going to the airports, resisting the ban, solidarity in the face of the roundup of so many refugees amongst us. When you think about people being rounded up in the middle of the night for who they are, and you think in terms of history, and you think of a police force that disregards another police force, specifically targets communities that are trying to help people, it's hard not to think about at least the early 30s in Germany. At least as a Jew, I find it difficult not to make that association. But we've had judges who've resisted, and the resistance here is alive. Okay, so then moving to how this plays out in terms of peace. On the one hand, you open the paper, you've got one crisis after another. I want to focus on the international ones. I want just for a second, I want you to imagine that a drone bomb comes through the ceiling. that explodes right next to that man, that maybe 9/10 of us are killed, and the other 10th survives. Just think about that for a second. Then to appreciate this is happening on a daily basis at the end of U.S. bombs, right? I mean, we know that, 230 people, civilians, were killed in yet another mistake in the bombing in Mosul. So to appreciate that the wars are going on. We don't see them, but they are going on. And it's this assault on human beings, people much like us, that we have to address and stop. So what do we have with Trump and company? Well, we know we got another $54 billion for military spending. The United States, even before this $54 billion, was spending more than the next 7 biggest military spenders combined. 54, we now are being reminded, driven to have great fear of Russia, right? Russia's military budget is less than the increase in the U.S. military spending, right? Let's put this in perspective. Reiner will remind us that the overall NATO budget is $800 billion. Compare that to about 48 to $50 billion for the Russians. I mentioned what happened in, we have this is over and above the $1 trillion. It's a number I can't really wrap my head around. $1 trillion for a whole new generation of nuclear weapons and their delivery systems. We already have more than enough nuclear weapons, right, to bring on nuclear winter to end life as we understand it. And coming out of the Pentagon right now is a call to, as part of the modernization, to also be developing mini weapons, weapons with, say, 2/3 the destructive power of the Hiroshima bomb. Why do they want them? So we can fight and win, they believe, limited nuclear wars. I think this is time. Another event that people might want to organize here would be a showing of Dr. Strangelove, because we're going back to that period. Other elements here. I'm sure you've read of late about the famine in Yemen, right? Posed by the Saudi bombing and the blockades. Where do you think the Saudis get all of those weapons? Right? And we even now have the United States flying bombing missions, not only drones, but airplane bombing missions over Yemen. The United States is at war in Yemen. Trump is escalating the ongoing wars in Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan, and we have to be prepared to kind of find ways to resist the plans for the permanent basing of U.S. forces in Syria and Iraq and continuing in Afghanistan. We have, it's a grim bit I'm laying out, but we need to look at the world we're in. We have Tillerson has drawn a red line against North Korea, saying that, and Trump as well, basically that they can't move forward with their next nuclear testing, and that we will not negotiate with them. In fact, as they say, all options are on the table. Well, when a nuclear power says all options are on the table, that includes the threat of first strike nuclear attack, as if that could be contained, and as if that wouldn't kill millions of innocent people. We had the undermining of the One China policy, which Trump has been forced to back off on, but we have increasingly provocative military exercises, the so-called free navigation voyages of our aircraft carriers in close proximity to the Chinese islands that they have created. We have if you look at the military spending, a big part of the overall commitments are to build a whole new generation of aircraft carriers, submarines, other warships, principally to reinforce the pivot to Asia, building on Obama. And we have in this context, of course, total disregard for diplomacy. In the United States at this point, maybe a reflection of Trump, who needs to dominate and thinks only raw power is valuable, right? The United States has basically given up soft power. Look at what's happened with his climate decisions of yesterday. I think Thomas Friedman, who I don't always like, I think this morning has it right. I mean, Donald Trump in many ways is the greatest gift China has had in a long period of time. So and then of course the last piece, NATO. Well, Reiner's going to talk more about that. We now have, just to go back, Central, and most of us weren't paying much attention to it. In 1990, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, there was really one of the most fundamental deals of the 20th century, right? Germany could reunite essentially on West German terms, but the quid pro quo was that the boundary, the forces of NATO wouldn't move a centimeter closer to Moscow, to Russia, right? A country that suffered from the Napoleonic invasions and suffered from the Nazi invasions of 27 million dead. So now that we have U.S. forces in Poland, you have NATO forces in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, all on the Russian borders. We did a little bit of a coup in Ukraine. The Russians are looking and remembering history and feeling, to the U.S. dominance of militarization of space, dominance of conventional weaponry, even, believe it or not, dominance of cyber warfare. They're feeling besieged. If you look a couple years ago, you can find it on the web, a press conference that Putin gave. And he said, if you push a spring too tight, it's going to snap back. So we need to understand that part of the tensions that we're facing now is because we drove that spring that tight, and the Russians are responding as really one would expect. I could go on with this, but I'll put it aside to kind of move us along. And then just to appreciate that there is the very real relationship between our militarization and who pays not only abroad, people at the end of our bombs, but people here. And when we think about militarization, most of us are just thinking about tanks and soldiers and missiles. But think about the militarization of the police. Think about the militarization of the border. Think about the very real fears we have now in the immigrant community. I mean, it's American Friends Service Committee, a lot of the work that we do basically is to be supporting immigrant communities in their struggle for freedom and dignity. And I can tell you that the fear in many immigrant communities is absolutely palpable. We have the situation where mosques have been burned, and many Muslims feel not safe walking down the street. And of course, there are many responses that we can have. And I think one of the things we need to celebrate is that many people in the peace movement, many progressives, many people of conscience have responded very well. I mean, we now have like over 400 sanctuary cities, I think it's 400 sanctuary churches and institutions have been created. As I said before, people going to the airports. And I think at root, when we think about peace movement, we need to think about, we need to be working for the abolition of nuclear weapons. We need to be stopping these wars. But we can't be turning a blind eye to what's happening down the street and to people in our community who are under threat. That's what human solidarity is about. The other thing, which is sort of interesting, and again, Reiner will be talking about, one of the other consequences, of course, is the United States is increasingly isolated in the world. Right? Many countries moving to disassociate themselves from the United States. And it's interesting, again, I expect Reiner will go into it in greater detail, but the dynamics, not only now at the UN with the negotiations for a nuclear weapons ban, which about 120 countries on nuclear weapons states have bounded together and said, well, too bad, we don't care if you'll participate in these negotiations. We're going to create our own reality. A couple of years ago, I was at the high-level meeting on nuclear disarmament at the UN, at the time when the United States we were all being trained to hate Rouhani of Iran. And he gave, I think, the third speech for heads of state and ambassadors, foreign ministers. And he explained that Iran was not about to get nuclear weapons, and he bitterly complained on behalf of the non-aligned movement that the United States and the other nuclear powers had failed to fulfill our obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. I mean, Article 6 of the NPT says that the nuclear weapon states will engage in good faith negotiations for the complete elimination of their nuclear arsenals. And now, 45 years on, of course, we're spending $1 trillion for new nuclear weapons. What was interesting was to watch one head of state, one foreign minister, and one ambassador after another rise and associate their government with the statement made by President Rouhani. And you could see the isolation of the United States and to a similar degree the other nuclear powers. And this is something you don't read about in the New York Times, but if you want to understand where we are in the world and understand that there are potential consequences here, it's worth doing. Let me then turn a little bit more to Trump and nuclear weapons. Remember, maybe it was the first or second Republican primary debate, and Trump was asked about the nuclear triad, and this look of almost terror came across his face because he didn't know what it was. So this is the man who is responsible for our arsenal now. This is a man who, as you'll recall, asked his briefers, why can't we use our nuclear weapons? Sort of reminds you of Madeleine Albright, which said, we have such a wonderful military, why can't we use it? Again, we have all options on the table. We have the call for a new nuclear arms race. And again, more recently, the first conversation with Putin, right? The first one. And Putin says, I think we should extend, when it runs out, the New START treaty negotiated by Obama. Well, Trump puts his hand over the phone and asks his advisors, what's the New START treaty? Right? And after he gets the answer, he tells Putin, no, we're not going to extend it because that's just a terrible Obama treaty. Now, it's a very minimal treaty, but what it did do was to allow continued verification and monitoring of both sides. So this is something Trump apparently is going to throw away. And as I said before, we have now the Defense Science Board saying, let's get these small nuclear weapons. So it's a tough situation we face. I don't think we should blink it away. But then, think in terms, the April 4th is going to be the anniversary of Martin Luther King's Beyond Vietnam speech. I'm sure that in the last month, somewhere, you've seen images from the Civil Rights Movement. Think of what it was like to be black in Birmingham or in Albany, Georgia. Think about the levels of repression people felt. Think about what it took inside to stand up to it and to resist and to overcome. Well, that's what we have to find in ourselves. And we have to do it imaginatively. Talking to friends, here in the Friends meeting, what do we do? Talking to friends and fellow sister teachers, the nurses you work with. What can we do in the place where we work that will move the struggle forward? With whom can we act in solidarity? And then coming to nuclear disarmament, I'll just say a few words here. Reiner wrote a book about Joseph Rotblat. I have a memory of Joseph Rotblat. Rotblat was the one nuclear scientist in the Manhattan Project, the project that invented the nuclear bomb. He was the one scientist who quit over moral considerations. And he went on to found the Pugwash Conference and worked closely with his good friend Bertrand Russell. Some of you may have heard of the Russell-Einstein Manifesto. It was Rotblat who was the principal author of that. And in Hiroshima, it's an interesting place to be talking about nuclear weapons. And Rotblat was probably about 6'3", I would guess. and at this point, somewhat older and very distinguished. And he pulls himself up and is lecturing, at a large conference, and says, look, humanity faces a stark choice. We can either completely eliminate nuclear weapons, or we'll see their global proliferation. Why? Because no nation will long tolerate what it perceives to be an unjust imbalance of power, or in this case, terror. So this is where we are.